നമസ്കാരം. ലോകപ്രശസ്ത സോഫ്റ്റ്വെയർ ഫ്രീഡം ആക്ടിവിസ്റ്റും കമ്പ്യൂട്ടർ പ്രോഗ്രാമറുമായ റിച്ചാർഡ് മാത്യു സ്റ്റോൾമാനാണ് ഇന്ന് ഇന്ത്യ വിഷനിൽ നമ്മോടൊപ്പം ഉള്ളത്. Sir, welcome to Indiavision. You have revolutionized the field of software, but I will say that the revolution has happened in you far before 80s, or definitely, to be specific, before 83. So what has created the revolutionary in you?
Well, I don't know, first of all, if I've succeeded in revolutionizing the field of software. I aim to, but as of yet, only a small fraction of software users are using freedom-respecting software, free software. But how did I learn to appreciate free software? By living in a free software community in the 1970s when I worked at MIT in the Artificial Intelligence Lab. I was hired there in 1971 while I was a student at Harvard, and I was hired to help develop the operating system. In other words, I was a system hacker. That's what we were called. And at the lab, we used a free operating system, most of which had been developed in the lab, but some programs had been obtained from elsewhere. But we had the source code, we could freely change it, freely redistribute it. So we had all the freedom that defines free software. And that way of life I just loved because I was part of a community, and the knowledge we worked with was part of human knowledge. We were part of a university. We felt it was our mission to make knowledge available to whoever would like it. Of course, that's not what universities typically do today. I feel they've been corrupted by money. But back then, we thought of this as part of the lab's mission. It was entirely part of the spirit of the lab that the software we wrote we would also give to anyone. But then that community was killed off under commercial pressure. And I saw myself facing a life of proprietary software, software that the users don't control. So instead, the software controls the users. And I looked at that, I contrasted that with the life of freedom I had known before, and I said no. I said, that would be an ugly, disgusting life. I don't want that life. I want a life in freedom, and I'm willing to work to make it. So I launched the GNU project to develop a complete free software operating system, which is called GNU. And today this system exists. It works together with the kernel Linux, so you can call the combination GNU plus Linux, and it's used by millions of people.
Yes. Your uncompromising attitude on ethical values have made many people call you a radical or extremist. You yourself consider as an extremist?
Well, first of all, whether I'm a radical, that's a matter of interpretation. As I see it, I'm trying to return to the way we lived in the past, so perhaps I'm more of a conservative in that regard. And as for extremist, well, extremist, literally speaking, just means if you look at the spectrum of views that people have, are you at the edge? And actually, we're not. There are people I know who consider my views not sufficiently strong because I don't want to totally abolish copyright, and there are people who do. So, no, I'm actually not an extremist. But whether one is an extremist really only is more of a comment on what views other people have.
You just now told me that you want to be a part of the past, or you are a little bit conservative, but you believe in technology too.
Right. Well, you see, the past for me was the 1970s when we had free software and we were free to do what we wished with it. So I'm trying to return to that particular aspect of the past, which doesn't mean I'm against technological progress as such. But remember, whether something is progress or the opposite, that's something we have to judge. Just because something is a technical advance doesn't mean it makes our life better. It can make our life better, it can make our life worse. There are a lot of advances nowadays in surveillance and control of people. And India is trying to apply them in an extremely dangerous way, imposing a national ID number on everyone and taking everybody's fingerprints too. And this is tyranny.
Why?
People should resist government power because government is very dangerous. When government has too much power, it becomes dangerous. So people must keep the government firmly in check. The government's power has to be firmly limited by the people so it can't do harm. And the harm it does is typically in the name of protecting people.
Yeah, they're saying for the security reasons they
Right,
have to do that.
But they don't have to, and the cure is worse than the disease. When you look at the danger to civilians in India, where's the biggest source of danger? It's the Indian government.
The government talk about terrorism, anti-government activity.
Well, sure, there are people who are against the government after all the oppression that's been done in the tribal areas and in Kashmir. You're going to have anti-government activity. In Kashmir, the activity is peaceful protest, and the civilians still get killed. So that's where the main danger is, and it's the same in the U.S. In the U.S., we had terrorist attacks in 2001. We don't know who was responsible. There's a theory that Al-Qaeda, who are Islamists, were responsible. We don't know that. Some other people suggest the U.S. government was a participant in those attacks, but there's no way to tell without a real investigation, and there has never been one. So I want a real investigation of how those attacks happened and who was really responsible. But in any case, that killed a little less than 3,000 people. And then Bush used that as an excuse to launch a war of aggression in Iraq, in which 4,500 people in the U.S. military were killed. So even if we ignore the million Iraqis that he killed, which is why this war of aggression should put him in prison for the rest of his life, if you just consider danger to Americans, it was the U.S. government that killed more. But it's a much bigger danger, however, cars. Cars killed around 4,000 people in the U.S. in September 2001. Cars repeated every month. Why don't we have a global war on car accidents? If we're really concerned with protecting people, let's protect people from car accidents. Let's look at the big dangers. But no, instead they pick a danger that's fairly small but gruesome, which is a perfect excuse to increase government power. For instance, surveillance. Bush was famous for increasing surveillance, but India is doing it too. In India, the police can now tap any phone and they don't have to get a court order. So the protection of the judiciary has been stripped from people. This government has too much power to surveil already.
So you say that the government, whether in India or in US or China, they are unprotected. And the governments are more dangerous than the terrorists. My question is, what option is left before the people, the common man?
Well, I don't know. But what we need to do is organize and demand no more surveillance, less surveillance, no national IDs.
Do you find hope in the new leader, Obama?
No, and I never did. I didn't vote for him because it was clear to me he was too right-wing. The only good thing I can say about him is he's not quite as right-wing as Bush, and he's not as crazy as Bush, but he's still right-wing. He doesn't support human rights.
What about the war going on in Afghanistan?
Well, I supported the war in Afghanistan originally, but not for the same reason as Bush. I was simply disgusted with the cruelty of the Taliban, especially their treatment of women. If it had been up to me, I would have smuggled arms to women for them to start a guerrilla army. But it turns out, though, that the corrupt government in Afghanistan doesn't protect women's rights much, and because it's so corrupt, nobody is loyal to it unless he's bought. And in this respect, it resembles South Vietnam in the 1960s, where the government was totally corrupt, so corrupt it couldn't actually fight because the corruption reached into the army. whenever a government is that corrupt, it's going to corrupt everything that has to do with the government, including the army and the police. We just saw that President Karzai's brother is in charge of a bank, and the management was stealing from the bank, and so the depositors wanted to take their money out, so it got a bailout. Those people are so corrupt, they can't possibly win. I wish I could see a government in Afghanistan that defended human rights and was honest and could win the loyalty of someone.
എനിക്ക് പഠിപ്പം ആരോടാണെന്നറിയാമോ? പറയൂ മാഡം. ഫിഷ ദിവ, എന്റെ സ്റ്റൈൽ ഫ്രണ്ട്.
ഏസി നടക്കുന്നു. ഏസി നടക്കുന്നു.
പിന്നല്ലാതെ മൈക്രോടെക് ഇൻവെർട്ടറില്ലേ, എല്ലാം നടക്കും ഒരു തടസ്സവുമില്ലാതെ.
ഞാൻ ഉറക്കെ ചോദിക്കുകയാണ്, വികസനം വഴിമുട്ടി നിൽക്കുന്ന നമ്മുടെ ഈ പഞ്ചായത്തിൽ ഒരു എയർപോർട്ട് വേണ്ടേ, ഒരു സ്മാർട്ട് സിറ്റി, ഒരു ഷോപ്പിംഗ് മാൾ? അതുകൊണ്ട്
നിറവേറ്റാനാവാത്ത വാഗ്ദാനങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയല്ല, പകരം നാടിനെ 100% മാലിന്യമുക്തമാക്കുന്നതിനുള്ള പ്രതിജ്ഞാബദ്ധതയ്ക്ക്, പരിസ്ഥിതിക്ക് കോട്ടം വരാത്ത വികസനത്തിന്, അതിനാവട്ടെ ഇത്തവണ നമ്മുടെ വോട്ടുകൾ. സാമൂഹിക പ്രതിബദ്ധതയോടെ മലബാർ.
പ്രകൃതിയുടെ താളമാണ് കല. ആയുർവേദം ജീവന്റെ താളവും. ഇന്ന് ലോകം ഈ സമഗ്രതയിലേക്ക് തിരിച്ചു വരുന്നു. ഗോഡ് ഈസ് ബാക്ക്. ധന്വന്തരി വൈദ്യശാല, ആയുർവേദത്തിന്റെ ദേവസ്പർശം സിൻസ് 1933.
ആദരണീയർക്ക് രാംരാജ് കോട്ടൺ മുണ്ടുകൾ, ഷർട്ടുകൾ.
You don't believe in God, but you advocate freedom, equality, liberation, etc. Do you have faith in communism?
No. Communism turned out to mean a form of dictatorship, a totalitarian monstrosity. I believe in a welfare state. I believe the government's duty is to organize society for the well-being and freedom of the citizens generally, which means not primarily for the rich. So I criticize the extreme capitalism that we have in most of the world today, but that doesn't mean I'm against capitalism. I don't want to eliminate private business. What I want to eliminate is the political power that business has today. Business should be able to exist, but it should have no power, which means that the people should be able to regulate business as they need to for their safety, because businesses are heartless, callous psychopaths. Corporations particularly, I should say, are psychopaths. And they will cause any sort of disaster if it's profitable. It happened in Bhopal, it happened in the Gulf of Mexico. It will happen wherever businesses have enough power that they can do these things.
So you think that the same has happened in Bhopal tragedy?
Well, we saw clearly that the U.S. corporation that was responsible has not been punished.
Yes.
That's because of the political influence of those big companies in the U.S., which puts pressure on India. And I suspect that the influence nowadays of those big companies in India is part of it, on the Indian government is part of it. Now, I don't know very much about the causes of that accident, so I don't know whether it was caused by bad safety practices or whether any lobbying by Union Carbide was responsible for that.
You told me that you don't believe in communism, but around the globe, the left governments have invited you, they have supported you in Brazil, in Venezuela, even in Kerala, so they have promoted your software or your social movement, I would like to say. So
yes, but note that they are not communist, except in Kerala. Venezuela is not a communist
I
state.
said the left government.
Yes.
So what actually attracts you to the left policies, or the left
Well,
policies get attracted to you?
by U.S. standards, I'm on the left, which does not mean communism. However, it means democracy with welfare state and strict regulation of business so business can't hurt people. And because, for instance, the Brazilian government is somewhat like that, the Ecuadorian government is somewhat like that, of course I'm happy to go and work with them. But I'll in fact work with anyone. Any government, regardless of what politics it has, if it's willing to work on promoting free software, I'll meet with them. I'd meet with the U.S. government on that.
Hugo Chavez and the opposition there in Venezuela says that he is curtailing the freedom of television broadcasters or the freedom of speech, etc. But still, on the other hand, he propagates this free software, etc.
Well, actually, you should note that there is still freedom of speech in Venezuela. There are still opposition TV channels and still lots of opposition newspapers saying extremely hostile things towards him every day. At the same time, he has done things that interfere with freedom of speech to some extent, and I don't think that's right.
In Kerala, VS Chidanathan government has talked to you many times, and in 12,500 schools, they have rejected the Windows app, they have adopted the free software.
Yes.
So how do you view that response of Kerala?
It's a big step forward. But remember, I see this as a global battle against proprietary software. So the schools of Kerala, that's an important victory.
You have given more suggestions to the Kerala government, like the contents to be made available web like that.
I'm saying educational works should be free, which means published under a freedom-respecting license. Kerala has developed a curriculum in several languages. If they make this curriculum free, these textbooks free, they will be useful around the world for education in freedom.
But they have not implemented it.
Not that I know. I made that suggestion a few years ago, and as far as I know, it hasn't been done yet, but it's still possible for them to do it.
Okay, now
we'll get a free curriculum sooner or later. Eventually, teachers will volunteer to write all the parts of it. But that'll take a long time, so if Kerala makes its curriculum free, then we'll get a free curriculum much sooner.
Now, in Kerala, some voices arises like you have to download the free software for public software.
Public software is sort of a distraction. It's not a very clearly defined concept, which vaguely overlaps with free software, but not entirely. Sometimes it seems that they simply mean programs that are specifically beneficial to the public. Well, those are good things, but that's a different kind of issue, and it doesn't replace the issue of users' freedom. Whichever programs we think are important to have exist, they should be free. They should respect the freedom of their users. Whenever the government decides to develop software, which governments do quite a bit, they should get it as free software. And then if it's at all possible, they should publish it as free software.
Okay. Now the government of India is planning to pass a policy on this software to make free software in offices so that the interoperability is...
well, that's great.
But the Microsoft says that if interoperability is aimed, you won't get that. So
they're mistaken. Basically, Microsoft is incompatible with the rest of the world, intentionally so. Microsoft refused to adopt the free standard ODF because it wanted to be incompatible, because Microsoft figures it has so much market power that it can push most of the world into its private so-called standard and then say all the rest of the world is incompatible with us, and only an idiot will be taken in by that bullshit, or somebody who's being paid to pretend to be taken in. And I'm very glad that the government of India looks like not being taken in by this and is heading towards use of a real free standard.
But still the proprietary vendors are putting pressure on the government, and so still we are doubting about the outcoming policy.
Well, here we see once again how the political power of business is destructive to society, because effectively it's a kind of corruption. It may not be illegal corruption, I don't know if if it were done with bribes, that would be illegal, but there are other ways for businesses to use political power. For instance, businesses can buy the state. To buy an individual politician would be illegal. To buy the state is lawful. The business just has to say, we will do this thing, we will give money to the state, or we'll spend money in a way that the state might like, in exchange for the states adopting policies to serve us.
So you
and
say
that's not even illegal, but it should be.
So you say that Microsoft is doing that, buying a state?
Well, I don't know what Microsoft is doing right now. I'm talking about in general. In general, this is something that businesses do. They make a deal with the state where, in effect, they purchase the state policies they want.
Okay. Now, Bill Gates, recently we have seen in news that he's offering donations to the rural folk of India.
Lots of money through unethical practices of proprietary software, and now he figures he can spend some of that money buying a good name. And if you are foolish, you will say, we will let him go on with these unethical practices and squeezing lots of money out of all of us, as long as he gives back some of it in a conspicuous way.
So that's behind that move?
I think so. Okay. The Gates Foundation does some work that's good, but it also does things that are harmful. For instance, I believe I read it has a lot of money invested in Monsanto.
അവതരിപ്പിക്കുന്നു നസാക ആക്വ, നിങ്ങളുടെ കുടിവെള്ളത്തെ സംരക്ഷിക്കുവാൻ. ലോകത്തിലെ ഏറ്റവും നല്ല ജലസ്രോതസ്.
സപ്പോസ് നിങ്ങളുടെ ഗേൾഫ്രണ്ട് നിങ്ങളുടെ ഫോണിൽ നിന്ന് അവളുടെ ഫ്രണ്ടിന്റെ നായ്ക്കുട്ടിയെ പറ്റി 3/4 മണിക്കൂർ കത്തി വെച്ചാ തടയാൻ പറ്റൂ? അതോടെ സുന്ദരിക്കുട്ടി രാക്ഷസി കുട്ടിയായി മാറില്ലേ? എന്റെ അടുത്ത് യൂണിയനുണ്ട് സാർ. എല്ലാ 1 പൈസ പെർ സെക്കൻഡ് കോളുകൾക്കും 60% വരെ ഡിസ്കൗണ്ട് ഉണ്ട്. ചുരുക്കി പറഞ്ഞ അതേ ഡോക്ടറിൽ കൂടുതൽ സംസാരിക്കാന്നേ. ഹായ് രേഖ.
നടക്കുന്നു.
പിന്നല്ലാതെ മൈക്രോടെക് ഇൻവെർട്ടറില്ലേ, എല്ലാം നടക്കും ഒരു തടസ്സവുമില്ലാതെ.
മാലിന്യ സംസ്കരണം
ഇതൊന്നും നമ്മുടെ പണിയല്ല. മാലിന്യ സംസ്കരണത്തിലൂടെ കോർപ്പറേഷൻ മുനിസിപ്പാലിറ്റി ഒക്കെ ഈ നിലപാട് നാം മാറ്റണം. നാടിനെ മാലിന്യമുക്തമാക്കേണ്ടത് നമ്മൾ ഓരോരുത്തരുടെയും കടമയാണ്. നാടിന്റെ ബ്യൂട്ടിയും ക്വാളിറ്റിയും എന്നും നിലനിൽക്കാൻ മാലിന്യമുക്ത കേരളത്തിനായി നമുക്ക് അണിചേരാം. സാമൂഹ്യ പ്രതിബദ്ധതയോടെ മലബാർ ഗ്രൂപ്പ്.
അല്ല,
ചിലപ്പോൾ ലൈറ്റ് ഓഫാക്കുന്നത് അത്ര എളുപ്പമാവില്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഉപയോഗിക്കൂ ഫിലിപ്സ് എനർജി എഫിഷ്യന്റ് ലൈറ്റ്സ്. അത് നൽകുന്നു മികച്ച പ്രകാശം, ഒപ്പം ലാഭവും.
ഇരട്ടി ആയുസ് ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടില്ലാതെ
ഏറ്റവും കുറഞ്ഞ പണിക്കൂലിയിൽ ഏറ്റവും പുതിയ ഡിസൈൻസ് കിട്ടണമെങ്കിൽ അറ്റ്ലസ് തന്നെ പോണം.
അറ്റ്ലസ് ജ്വല്ലറി, ജനകോടികളുടെ വിശ്വസ്ത സ്ഥാപനം. വെണ്ണിൽ പുലരിക്കുദയം, മണ്ണിൽ പുതുമയ്ക്കുദയം,
പൗരുഷത്തിന് ഉദയം.
മുണ്ടുകളും ഷർട്ടുകളും.
Quite astonishing to me, I read that you advocate paper voting for machine voting.
Absolutely. You can't trust computers for voting because computers are very flexible devices. It's very easy to change what they do. For instance, it's very easy to change it so that every 5th time there's a vote for him, give it to her instead. You can't trust voting systems that can't be audited afterwards, that don't allow the votes themselves to be audited. It's not enough to audit the machine. You've got to be able to recount the votes. And computerized counting machines that only give you a total, there's no way to check whether that total is right. So any voting system that doesn't allow the votes to be audited, in other words, recounted, cannot be trusted.
So that's a question that you are posing a question on the advancement of technology too.
Technological advances make it possible to do certain additional things. Well, some things are good to do and some are not good to do. Of all the things we now can do, it would be a mistake to say we should do them all. Some of them, let's do. Some of them, if you want to do them, why not? It's up to you. But there's some things that are harmful. Not every innovation is good. At one point, democracy was an innovation. At one point, dictatorship was an innovation. So I like the first and I condemn the second. We shouldn't equate innovation with good.
You told me that you dream of a welfare state, but what political ideology can exactly bring that state which you dream?
Well, in the U.S., these views are called liberal. But liberal in the U.S. doesn't mean the same thing as liberal in the rest of the world, because liberal in most of the world means let business do whatever it wants. But liberal in the U.S. refers to politics of people like Franklin D. Roosevelt, who said, let's have the government support what people need and let's regulate business if it's doing things that are harmful.
What dream in the software field is yet to be fulfilled?
Well, I hope that someday everyone using software will have control over the software she is using. The software that lets the users have control over the program is free software. Proprietary software puts the program in control of the users, and that's the injustice I hope we will get rid of. I also hope to see a day in which file sharing of published works on the internet is lawful, because sharing is good, and stopping people from sharing is an attack on the basis of society. And I also hope to see systems which enable the public to support artists in ways that don't involve stopping people from sharing. Supporting the arts is a very useful thing to do, but we must do it in ways that don't prohibit sharing the artistic works. And we can do it that way. It's just the publishing companies that don't want to let us.
Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me on.